He walked in just in time to see his wife push his elderly mother down the stairs. Not just any woman. His flesh and blood, the woman who raised him with calloused hands and endless love. A mother she promised to care for, but secretly resented. He wasn't supposed to come home early from his job at the CN Tower offices. She didn't know he was standing at the door of their Scarborough townhouse, watching. He thought he had married a compassionate, patient woman, but what he saw shattered everything he believed about her. Now he's not just a husband. He's a son with a choice: protect his mother or protect his marriage. Either way, someone's life just changed forever. Adebayo hadn't planned to return so soon from his shift at the telecommunications center downtown, but something, intuition, divine whisper, or maybe just his mother Folake's voice that morning saying, "Omomi, please come home early today," pulled him back. As he stepped into their narrow townhouse on Midland Avenue, briefcase still damp from Toronto's October drizzle, the silence felt off. Too quiet for a home with an elderly woman who loved to hum old Yoruba songs while cooking. Then he heard it, a sharp voice cutting through the stillness, then scuffling. Feet on stairs. A cry, half swallowed. He turned the corner from the small foyer, past the family photos lining the cream-colored walls. The moment he saw his mother's frail body launched into the air, time folded. Gravity vanished. Sound died. And in that breathless void, all he could see were her weathered fingers outstretched, reaching for the wooden banister that no longer wanted to hold her. She was suspended in flight, her gray wrapper coming undone, her silver hair catching the light from the upstairs window, her mouth parted in a silent scream, her wise eyes locked on her son at the door. His leather briefcase slipped from his hand before she even hit the hardwood floor. The thud echoed like a gunshot through their Scarborough home. His heart fractured in one clean, unforgiving snap. Her name was Folake Adebayo. She was 78, and she had once been the center of a love so gentle it wrapped around her family like the warm Lagos breeze she still dreamed about. Before the silence. Before the fall. Before the world became divided into what was and what could never be again. The plane touched down at Pearson International Airport on a cold February morning, the kind where Toronto's wind cuts through even the thickest coats. Folake pressed her face to the small window, watching the snow-covered tarmac stretch endlessly under gray skies. After 78 years in Lagos, the bustling markets of Oshodi, the familiar sounds of Yoruba echoing from every corner, the scent of suya grilling on street corners, this felt like landing on another planet. "Mama, we're here," Adebayo had said softly, helping her with her worn leather handbag. "Welcome to Canada." She had smiled then, though her heart ached. This wasn't her choice. But when your only son, your miracle child born after years of prayer, calls and says, "Mama, come live with us, we want to take care of you," what mother says no? Adebayo was 45. An engineer who'd immigrated to Toronto 8 years earlier. He'd worked his way up from entry-level positions to a senior role at the CN Tower's telecommunications division. He lived in a modest 3-bedroom townhouse in Scarborough with his wife of 3 years, Yitund. The house sat on a quiet street lined with similar brick townhouses, each with a small front yard and black iron railings. Maple trees, Canada's symbol, lined the sidewalks, their branches bare in winter but promising shade come summer. The neighborhood was diverse: Filipino families next door, a Jamaican couple across the street, an elderly Italian man who always waved from his garden. It should have been perfect. At first, the arrangement seemed blessed. Yitund, 38, worked as a nurse at Scarborough Health Network and appeared genuinely excited about Folake's arrival. "Mama mi," she would say in careful Yoruba, "let me help you with that." She'd guide Folake around the house, showing her where everything was kept: the tea in the upper cabinet, the remote control for the large-screen TV, the thermostat that controlled the mysterious thing called central heating. Folake tried to adapt. She learned to navigate the subway system, the TTC, they called it, riding the Line 3 Scarborough RT to visit the African stores on Lawrence Avenue East where she could buy plantains, palm oil, and dried fish. She discovered the Scarborough Town Center Mall, wandering its endless corridors with wonder at the abundance. But adaptation came with a price. In Lagos, she had been Mama Folake, the woman neighbors consulted for advice, who organized the women's group at her church, who could cook jollof rice that made grown men weep with joy. Here, she was just an elderly immigrant woman who spoke accented English and needed help reading medication labels. The Toronto winters were brutal. Not just the cold, though February temperatures of -20 degrees Celsius shocked her system, but the isolation. In Lagos, life happened outdoors, markets, streets, neighbors calling across compounds. Here, people disappeared into their houses, and silence ruled. Yitun seemed patient in those early months. She would drive Folake to Calvary Baptist Church on Sundays, where a small but vibrant Nigerian community gathered. She would listen politely when Folake shared stories of life back home. She even attempted to cook Nigerian food, though her jollof rice never quite matched Folake's. But beneath the surface, something was brewing. The first sign came 6 months after Folake's arrival. Adebayo was working late, a common occurrence in his demanding job, and Folake was preparing dinner. She had found a way to make ifo riro, spinach stew, using ingredients from the Loblaws grocery store on Escalating, adapting her grandmother's recipe to Canadian ingredients. Yitun came home from her 12-hour shift at the hospital, exhausted, still in her scrubs. "Mama, what's that smell?" she asked, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "I'm making ifo riro for dinner," Folake replied warmly. "I found good spinach at the store. The whole house smells like... I have a headache. Can you please cook something normal?" Folake blinked. "Normal? You know what I mean. Canadian food. Something that doesn't make the house smell like..." Yitun trailed off, but the damage was done. That night, Folake ate her ifo riro alone while Yitun ordered pizza from a place on Kingston Road. What followed was a gradual erosion of warmth, so subtle that Adebayo missed it completely. He left for work each morning at 7 a.m., taking the TTC downtown to his office near Union Station. He returned most evenings around 7 p.m., often later during busy periods. In those 10 hours of his absence, a different reality existed. Yitun began to change. The polite patience evaporated. The careful Yoruba phrases stopped. Small cruelties emerged, moving Folake's medications to higher shelves she couldn't reach, forgetting to buy the specific brands of tea Folake preferred, speaking only English when neighbors visited, leaving Folake isolated in conversations, turning up the TV volume when Folake was trying to nap, making faces when Folake spoke Yoruba on the phone with friends back home. "She doesn't understand our culture," Folake would tell her friends during long-distance calls to Lagos. But she never told Adebayo. In Yoruba culture, causing division in a marriage is seen as a grave offense. She would endure rather than destroy her son's happiness. Toronto's second winter hit Folake harder than the first. The novelty had worn off, replaced by bone-deep loneliness. The cold kept her indoors for days at a time. The short days, sunset at 4:30 p.m. in December, depressed her spirits. That's when Yitun's behavior escalated. One evening in January, Adebayo was attending a work conference in Ottawa, a 3-day event he couldn't avoid. Folake and Yitun were alone. "Mama," Yitun said, her voice cold as the wind howling outside their Scarborough windows, "we need to talk." They sat in the living room, the fake fireplace providing light but no real warmth. Outside, snow piled against the windows of their townhouse. "This isn't working," Yitun continued. "You being here. It's affecting my marriage. Folake's heart clenched. What do you mean, Omomi? Don't call me that. I'm not your child. The words hit like slaps. You've been here 1.5 years. You don't work. You don't contribute. You just exist. Taking up space. Making the house smell like Nigeria. Speaking that language I can't understand. Folake felt tears sting her eyes. I try to help. I clean, I cook. Cook food nobody wants to eat. Clean things that don't need cleaning. Adebayo feels guilty asking you to contribute because you're his mother, but I don't have that problem. The room felt colder than the Toronto winter outside. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time for you to go back home. Or find somewhere else to live. A senior home. Somewhere appropriate. That night, Folake lay in her small bedroom. Adebayo had converted his home office for her, staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, she could hear the neighbors' lives. A TV, someone washing dishes, a baby crying. Normal sounds of people living normal lives. She thought about Lagos. About her small flat in Surulere where she knew every neighbor's name. About the early morning calls to prayer from the mosque down the street. About buying fresh tomatoes from the same vendor she'd known for 20 years. But she also thought about Adebayo. How proud he'd been when he first showed her around Toronto. How he'd taken her to see Niagara Falls, her eyes wide with wonder at the thundering water. How he'd said, "Mama, this is your home now too." She decided to endure. Spring came late to Toronto that year. By April, patches of grass finally appeared through the melting snow. Folake began taking walks around the neighborhood, greeting the Filipino grandmother next door, waving to the Jamaican man who always sat on his porch in the evenings. But inside their townhouse on Midland Avenue, the atmosphere grew toxic. Yutun's shifts at Scarborough Health Network were demanding, 12-hour days dealing with Toronto's aging population, understaffed units, constant pressure. She came home exhausted, and Folake became a convenient target for her frustration. The passive aggression became active cruelty. Accidentally washing Folake's traditional clothes with bleach. Hiding the house keys so Folake couldn't go out. Eating food Folake had prepared and leaving empty containers. Playing loud music when Folake was trying to pray. Inviting friends over and speaking about the burden of caring for elderly relatives within Folake's hearing. But the worst part was the gaslighting. When Adebayo would ask how his mother was doing, Yutund would smile sweetly, "Oh, she's fine. We're getting along wonderfully. Though she does seem a bit confused lately. Forgetful. It might be her age." Folake watched her son's concerned expressions and felt her heart break. Yutund was planting seeds of doubt about her mental capacity, preparing the ground for something Folake couldn't yet see. The incident happened on a Tuesday in October. Toronto's autumn was in full display, the maple trees on their street blazing with red and gold, the air crisp but not yet bitter. Folake had been feeling unusually optimistic. She'd received a care package from her church friends in Lagos, palm oil, stockfish, and letters that smelled like home. She decided to surprise Adebayo with his favorite meal, pounded yam and egusi soup. She spent the morning at the African store on Lawrence Avenue, carefully selecting ingredients. The afternoon was devoted to cooking, the townhouse filling with the rich aromas of her homeland. Yutund arrived home early from her shift, claiming a headache. She found Folake in the kitchen, humming a Yoruba song, stirring the egusi soup with a satisfaction that came from creating something beautiful. "What is that smell?" Yutund's voice was sharp, exhausted. "I'm making egusi soup for Bayo. His favorite. I can't deal with this today." Yutund pressed her fingers to her temples. "The whole house reeks. I have a migraine, and I need silence, and instead I come home to this." Folake turned from the stove, wooden spoon in hand. "Omo me, I can turn down the heat." Stop calling me that. Yitan's voice cracked like a whip. I am not your child. I am not your anything. I'm sick of pretending to be some perfect daughter-in-law while you turn my house into a Nigerian restaurant. The words hung in the air between them. Folake felt something shift, like a foundation settling into new, unstable ground. This is my home too, Folake said quietly. No, it's not. Yitan stepped closer. This is my house, my marriage, my life, and you're just in the way. That's when Folake made her mistake. She stood straighter, drawing on decades of dignity, and said something that would haunt them both. I will not be disrespected in my son's house. The slap came without warning. Yitan's hand cracked across Folake's cheek with a sound that echoed through the small kitchen. For a moment, neither woman moved. The egusi soup bubbled forgotten on the stove. Outside, a TTC bus rumbled down Midland Avenue. Life continued while their world fractured. Folake touched her stinging cheek, her eyes wide with shock. Yitan's face showed no remorse. Only cold satisfaction. Remember that the next time you want to talk about respect. The morning of the fall, Adebayo had been reluctant to leave for work. Something in his mother's demeanor, a quietness, a fragility, made him hesitate at the door of their Scarborough townhouse. Mama, are you feeling well? Folake smiled, the same smile she'd worn when he was a boy and she was hiding her own troubles to protect him. I'm fine, Omomi. Go to work. Take care of that CN tower for us. It was their little joke. She pretended he personally maintained Toronto's iconic tower. He kissed her forehead and left, walking to the Midland TTC station for his commute downtown. The October morning was crisp, leaves crunching under his feet as he walked past the other townhouses in their complex. At work, in his office overlooking Lake Ontario, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. His mother had seemed smaller somehow, more fragile. At 78, she was still relatively healthy, but 2 years in Toronto's climate had aged her in ways that worried him. Around 3 p.m., that unease became urgent. He couldn't focus on the telecommunications equipment reports on his desk. The feeling pulled at him like a physical force. He told his supervisor he needed to check on his mother and left work early, something he rarely did. The TTC ride back to Scarborough felt endless. The subway crawling through its underground tunnels, the transfer to Line 3, the final stop at Midland Station. As he walked the familiar route home, past the Tim Hortons where his mother sometimes bought coffee, past the small park where she fed pigeons, his anxiety intensified. He used his key quietly, not wanting to startle her if she was napping. The house was too quiet. Usually, he could hear her humming, or the sound of the television, or pots moving in the kitchen. Then he heard voices. Chirp. Angry. He moved toward the stairs, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor they'd installed last year. What he saw from the bottom of the stairs would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. His mother, small and dignified in her blue wrapper and white blouse, standing 3 steps from the top. Her gray hair neat, her posture straight despite her age. His wife, Yitan, 1 step above her, finger pointing, voice raised in anger he could hear but not understand from this distance. Then, in slow motion that his mind would replay frame by frame forever, he watched Yitan's hands move. Not a wild shove. Not a moment of passion. A deliberate, calculated push. His mother's eyes widened. Her hands reached for the banister. Her feet left the step. Time stopped. In that frozen moment, Adebayo saw everything. His mother's face, confused and afraid. Yitan's expression, not shocked or horrified, but coldly satisfied. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the upstairs window, illuminating dust motes that hung in the air like suspended judgment. Then gravity reclaimed its hold. Folake's body tumbled down the carpeted stairs, 1, 2, 3 steps, before her head struck the hardwood floor of the landing with a sound that would echo in Adebayo's dreams forever. His briefcase hit the floor before his mother did. "Call 911. Call 911. Adebayo's voice shattered the silence as he rushed to his mother's side. Folake lay crumpled at the bottom of the stairs, her blue wrapper twisted around her legs, her gray hair spread across the hardwood like spilled water. Blood seeped from a cut on her forehead. Her breathing was shallow, labored. Yatun stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her face a mask of calculated shock. "Oh my God," she said, her voice perfectly pitched for someone discovering a terrible accident. "She must have fallen. I was in the bathroom. I heard the noise." But Adebayo had seen. He had seen everything. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, standard response time for their area of Scarborough. The house filled with uniformed strangers, paramedics, police officers, neighbors who'd heard the sirens and came to help. "What happened?" asked the lead paramedic, a middle-aged white woman with kind eyes. "She fell down the stairs," Yatund answered quickly, tears now streaming down her face. "I don't know how. She's been unsteady lately. Her age, you know." Adebayo knelt beside his mother as the paramedics worked. Folake's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, searching. "Omo mi," she whispered in Yoruba. "My son." "I'm here, Mama. I'm here." Her eyes found his, and in them he saw not just pain, but something else. Knowledge. Fear. And underneath it all, a silent plea, "Help me." The ride to Scarborough Health Network was a blur of sirens and medical equipment. Adebayo held his mother's hand while paramedics monitored her vital signs and radioed ahead to the emergency room. Yatund followed in her car, playing the role of the devoted daughter-in-law, calling family members with trembling voice, updating them on the terrible accident. But Adebayo knew better, and the knowledge sat in his stomach like poison. Scarborough Health Network's emergency room buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Tuesday evening in Toronto. Folake was wheeled directly into Trauma Bay 3, where Dr. Sarah Chin, the attending physician, began her assessment. Possible head injury, loss of consciousness, fell down approximately 10 stairs, the paramedic reported. Adebayo stood in the hallway, watching through the glass partition as strangers in scrubs worked over his mother's small form. For a moment, the sight transported him back to childhood, those times when Folake would tend his scraped knees and bumped heads with gentle hands and soft Yoruba lullabies. "Family of Folake Adebayo?" Dr. Chin emerged from the trauma bay, her expression serious but not grave. "That's me. I'm her son. She's stable. We're seeing a concussion, definitely, and we're concerned about a possible fracture in her left wrist. We're taking her for a CT scan now to rule out any brain bleeding. The good news is she's conscious and responsive." Relief flooded through Adebayo's body like warm water. "Can I see her?" "In a few minutes. The nurses are getting her settled." That's when Yatund arrived, her face flushed, her nurses' training taking over as she peppered Dr. Chen with medical questions. To any observer, she was the perfect concerned daughter-in-law. But when Dr. Chen asked what happened, Yatund's story flowed too smoothly, too rehearsed. "I was upstairs in the bathroom. I heard a terrible noise. When I came out, she was at the bottom of the stairs. She's been having some balance issues lately, her age, you know. We've been worried about this exact thing happening." Adebayo listened in silence, each word another nail in the coffin of his marriage. Later that evening, after the CT scan showed no brain bleeding and Folake had been admitted for overnight observation, Adebayo sat alone with his mother in her hospital room. The space was typical of Canadian hospitals, clean, functional, but sterile. A single window looked out over the parking lot, where streetlights illuminated cars covered with the first frost of the season. Folake looked small in the hospital bed, her gray hair spread across the white pillow, her left wrist in a soft cast. But her eyes were alert, watching her son with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Mama," he said softly, pulling his chair closer to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "My head hurts. My wrist aches. But I'm alive." Her voice was hoarse but steady. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the hospital, footsteps in the corridor, the distant chime of elevators, monitors beeping softly. "Mama," Adebayo said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Folake's eyes sharpened. "What is it, Omomi? What really happened today?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Folake looked away, toward the window where Toronto's night sky pressed against the glass. "I fell," she said quietly. "Mama." Adebayo's voice was gentle but firm. "I saw." The words hit Folake like a physical blow. Her eyes widened, filled with tears, and for a moment she looked not like his strong, dignified mother, but like a frightened old woman. "You saw." "I came home early. I was at the bottom of the stairs. I saw everything." Folake began to cry then, not the quiet, dignified tears of someone who has learned to suffer in silence, but the broken sobs of someone whose carefully constructed world has finally collapsed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Omomi." "Why are you apologizing? You did nothing wrong." "I did. I caused problems in your marriage. I should have gone back to Lagos when she asked me to. I should have." "She asked you to leave?" The story came out in pieces, interrupted by tears and long pauses where Folake struggled to find words for experiences she'd never imagined having to describe. The isolation, the small cruelties, the escalating hostility, the slap in the kitchen 3 days ago. "Why didn't you tell me?" Folake wiped her eyes with the tissue box Adebayo offered. "In our culture, a good woman doesn't cause division in her son's marriage. I thought if I endured, if I stayed quiet, things would get better. And today she said I was a burden, that I was ruining her life, that I should go back to Nigeria where I belong." Folake's voice grew smaller. "I told her this was my home too, that you brought me here, that I had rights. And then she pushed me, not in anger, not in heat. She looked at me and she decided, and she pushed me." The truth settled over them like Toronto's winter, cold, unavoidable, changing everything. That night, Adebayo didn't go home. He stayed in the hospital's family room, a cramped space with uncomfortable chairs and vending machines, thinking. He thought about his childhood in Lagos, raised by this woman who worked multiple jobs to send him to good schools. He thought about her pride when he got his engineering degree, her tears when he left for Canada, her joy when he sent for her. He thought about Yatund, the woman he'd married believing she was kind, compassionate, someone who would cherish his mother as he did. He thought about the house in Scarborough, the life they'd built, the future they'd planned. And he thought about what he'd seen, deliberate, calculated, cold. By morning, his decision was made. Yatund arrived at 8 a.m. with coffee and muffins from Tim Hortons, playing the devoted daughter-in-law role for any staff who might be watching. "How is she?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "Awake. Alert. Talking. That's wonderful. I was so worried. When can she come home?" Adebayo looked at his wife, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time since their marriage. He saw the careful makeup, the practiced expressions, the performance. "She's not coming home," he said quietly. Yatund's face flickered, just for a moment, before resuming its mask of concern. "What do you mean? Is she worse? Do they need to keep her longer?" "I mean she's never coming back to that house." The mask slipped further. "Adebayo, what are you talking about?" "I saw you push her." The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples that would never stop spreading. For a long moment, Yutun said nothing. Then, her voice very calm, very controlled. "That's ridiculous. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. I was at the bottom of the stairs. I saw everything. You saw an old woman fall. Nothing more. I saw my wife deliberately push my mother down a flight of stairs." The hospital corridor continued its morning rhythm around them. Nurses walking with purpose, doctors consulting charts, families having whispered conversations. Normal life proceeding while theirs disintegrated. "You can't prove anything," Yutun said finally, her voice flat. "I don't need to prove anything to you. I know what I saw. And what are you going to do about it?" The question revealed everything, not an innocent woman confused by false accusations, but someone calculating next moves, assessing damage, preparing strategies. "I'm going to protect my mother." "And our marriage?" Adebayo looked at this woman he'd promised to love and honor, and felt nothing but cold certainty. "What marriage?" Adebayo's first call was to Toronto Police Service. The officer who took his statement was Constable Maria Santos, a 15-year veteran who'd seen enough domestic violence to recognize the signs. "You're alleging that your wife deliberately pushed your elderly mother down the stairs?" "I'm not alleging. I'm stating. I witnessed it." "And you didn't intervene?" "It happened too fast. I was at the bottom of the stairs when I saw it. By the time I could react, she was falling." The questions continued for an hour. Constable Santos was thorough, professional, and importantly, she believed him. "We'll need to interview your mother and your wife separately. There will be a formal investigation. Are you prepared for what that means?" Adebayo nodded. "I'm prepared for whatever it takes to protect my mother." The investigation revealed disturbing patterns. Security cameras from the Midland TTC station confirmed Adebayo's early departure from work. Hospital records showed injuries consistent with the fall, but also older bruises on Folake's arms that she'd never mentioned. Most damning were the text messages found on Yutun's phone, conversations with a coworker complaining about the old woman and discussing solutions to the problem. "She's ruining my marriage," one text read. "Something has to change." Another, sent the day before the incident, "I can't take much more of this. She has to go." 3 days after the fall, Yutun was arrested at Scarborough Health Network as she finished her shift. The charges, aggravated assault and elder abuse. The arrest made local news, not front page, but enough to shame a family that had tried to build a quiet, respectable life in Toronto. Neighbors on Midland Avenue whispered over fences. Yutun's colleagues at the hospital spoke in hushed tones about the nurse who'd attacked an elderly woman. The Nigerian community was divided, some supporting Adebayo's decision to press charges, others arguing that family matters should be kept private. Folake was discharged from the hospital into her son's care, but not to their old house. Adebayo had found a small apartment in a seniors' building on Escalating Avenue, closer to the African community, with support services for elderly residents. "This is temporary, Mama," he told her as they settled into the one-bedroom unit. "Until we figure out what comes next." But Folake shook her head. "No, Omomi. This is enough. I don't need a big house. I need safety. I need peace." The trial took place 6 months later in a Toronto courtroom that had seen countless family tragedies. Judge Patricia Williams, herself a daughter of Caribbean immigrants, understood the cultural complexities at play. Yutun's defense lawyer argued that the push was accidental, that his client was simply trying to get past her mother-in-law on the narrow stairs, that the fall was unfortunate but not intentional. The Crown attorney presented a different story: systematic abuse, escalating hostility, and finally, deliberate violence against a vulnerable elderly woman. Adebayo testified about what he'd witnessed, his voice steady but his hands shaking as he described watching his mother fall. Folake testified too, quietly describing months of cruelty, isolation, and fear. Her voice never rose above a whisper, but her words filled the courtroom with the weight of truth. The text messages were entered as evidence. Character witnesses spoke about Yitan's previous kindness and professional competence, but also about changes in her behavior, increasing stress, resentment that had been building for months. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on both counts. Judge Williams sentenced Yitan to 2 years in prison, with a recommendation for psychiatric evaluation and mandatory anger management counseling. Elder abuse, the judge said in her sentencing remarks, is among the most cowardly of crimes. Mrs. Adebayo trusted you to care for her in her vulnerable years. Instead, you betrayed that trust in the most cruel way possible. 6 months after the trial, Folake had created a new life in her small apartment. She attended a Seniors' Day program 3 times a week, where she taught other elderly immigrants how to make traditional Nigerian dishes. She had friends now, other women from various African countries who understood the challenges of aging in a foreign land. Adebayo visited every day after work, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just sitting with her while she told stories of his childhood or shared news from friends back in Lagos. "Are you happy, Mama?" he asked one evening as they sat by her window watching Toronto's skyline light up in the distance. "I'm peaceful," she replied. "That's better than happy." The house in Scarborough sat empty for months before Adebayo finally sold it. Too many memories. Too much pain embedded in those walls. He moved to a smaller place in North York, closer to his mother's building. He never remarried. Some wounds, he learned, don't heal with new relationships. They heal with time, truth, and the simple act of choosing love over convenience. Folake, now 80, sits in the community room of her seniors' building, teaching a cooking class to a group of women from Nigeria, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Jamaica. They laugh together as she demonstrates the proper way to season jollof rice, their different accents creating a symphony of immigrant experience. She has found her place in Toronto, not as someone's burden or someone's charity case, but as herself, a woman with wisdom, skills, and love to share. Adebayo has learned to live with the knowledge that he married someone capable of such cruelty. But he's also learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is choose truth over peace, protection over preservation, justice over comfort. The scars remain, literal ones on Folake's wrist and forehead, emotional ones that will never fully fade. But she is alive. She is safe. She is loved. And in the end, that is enough. This story is about more than one family's tragedy. It's about the epidemic of elder abuse that exists in immigrant communities across Canada, hidden behind closed doors and cultural expectations of family harmony. Statistics Canada reports that 1 in 10 older adults experience some form of abuse, but experts believe the numbers are much higher in immigrant communities where reporting is complicated by language barriers, cultural shame, and economic dependence. Folake's story is tragically common. Elderly parents brought to Canada with promises of care and respect, only to find themselves isolated, unwelcome, and vulnerable in their own children's homes. But it's also a story of courage. The courage to speak truth, to break silence, to choose protection over peace. Dr. Amara Okafor, a geriatrician at Toronto's Mount Sinai Hospital who specializes in elder abuse, says Folake's case contains classic warning signs that families should watch for. Isolation from community and friends. Unexplained injuries or frequent accidents. Changes in behavior, becoming withdrawn or fearful. Caregivers showing excessive control or hostility. Financial exploitation or denial of basic needs. Cultural or language barriers used to isolate the elder. The tragedy, Dr. Okafor explains, is that these situations are often preventable. Families need support, education, and resources. Caregiving is stressful, especially when cultural expectations meet modern realities. Folake's story sparked conversations in Toronto's Nigerian community that had been long overdue. Elder abuse, previously whispered about in private, began to be discussed openly in churches, community centers, and family gatherings. Pastor David Alyamide of Calvary Baptist Church, where Folake worships, started a support group for elderly immigrants and their caregivers. We realized that many families were struggling in silence, he explains, bringing parents to Canada with the best intentions, but without understanding the challenges. The support group meets every Sunday after service, providing a safe space for both elderly immigrants and their adult children to discuss challenges, share resources, and find community solutions. Understanding evil requires understanding its origins. During her psychiatric evaluation, Yitun's own history of trauma emerged. She had grown up in an abusive household in Lagos, where her stepmother treated her with the same cruelty she would later show Folake. The cycle of abuse had created wounds that never healed, resentments that festered, and coping mechanisms that prioritized survival over empathy. Hurt people, explained Dr. Rebecca Chin, the psychiatrist who evaluated Yitun. This doesn't excuse her actions, but it helps us understand how someone can become capable of such cruelty toward a vulnerable person. In prison, Yitun underwent intensive therapy to address her childhood trauma and the resentment that had poisoned her marriage. She wrote letters to Folake, letters that were never sent, trying to understand her own actions, trying to find words for pain that had no adequate expression. "I see now that I wasn't angry at your mother," she wrote in one letter. "I was angry at my own mother, at my own childhood, at my own powerlessness. And I took it out on the most innocent person in the situation." Adebayo's decision to prosecute his wife sent shockwaves through Toronto's Nigerian community. Traditional expectations suggested that family matters should be handled privately, that public shame was worse than private suffering. But his choice also inspired others to speak up. 3 other cases of elder abuse were reported to Toronto police in the months following Yitun's trial, all involving immigrant families where elderly parents had been suffering in silence. Sometimes, Adebayo reflected, doing the right thing means disappointing everyone who wants you to do the easy thing. He lost some friends, faced criticism from relatives back in Nigeria, endured whispers at community events. But he also gained something invaluable, the knowledge that he had chosen love over loyalty, truth over comfort, protection over preservation. Today, Folake's life in Toronto looks different than what she had imagined when she first stepped off that plane at Pearson Airport. She didn't get the fairy tale ending of a harmonious multigenerational household. Instead, she got something better: dignity, safety, and a community of her own making. Her small apartment in the seniors building has become a gathering place for other elderly African women. They cook together, share stories, support each other through the challenges of aging in a foreign land. "I thought happiness meant being taken care of," Folake reflects. But real happiness is taking care of yourself and others, having purpose, having voice. She volunteers at the African Community Center on Finch Avenue, helping new immigrants navigate Toronto's systems. She teaches cooking classes, shares her knowledge of traditional medicine, provides motherly wisdom to younger women struggling with their own challenges. Adebayo visits twice a week, bringing groceries and staying for dinner. Their relationship has deepened through trauma, not despite it, but because of their shared commitment to truth and healing. "My son saved my life," Folake says simply. "Not just that day, but every day since, by choosing to believe me, to protect me, to love me enough to do the hard thing." This story teaches us several crucial lessons about family, love, and protection. 1. Love is not always convenient. Real love sometimes requires us to make difficult choices, to confront uncomfortable truths, to prioritize protection over peace. 2. Silence enables abuse. Cultural expectations that prioritize family harmony can inadvertently protect abusers and endanger victims. Speaking up, even when it's culturally difficult, can save lives. 3. Healing is possible even after trauma. Elderly people can rebuild their lives, find new purpose, create new communities. Age doesn't mean resignation to suffering. 4. Justice serves everyone. Holding abusers accountable doesn't just protect victims. It sends a message to communities that elder abuse will not be tolerated. 5. Prevention requires community. Elder abuse thrives in isolation. Communities that create support systems, open dialogue, and resources for struggling families can prevent tragedies before they occur. Elder abuse remains a hidden epidemic in Canada's immigrant communities. Language barriers, cultural shame, economic dependence, and fear of deportation keep many victims silent. But Folek's story shows that change is possible, one family, one community, one brave decision at a time. The Scarborough neighborhood where Adebayo used to live now has an elder abuse prevention program, inspired partly by his family's story. Community workers visit elderly residents, provide resources in multiple languages, and create safe spaces for reporting concerns. Change happens, says Maria Santos, the police constable who took Adebayo's initial report, when people decide that protecting the vulnerable is more important than protecting the status quo. If you're caring for an elderly family member, acknowledge that caregiving is stressful and seek support. Recognize that cultural expectations can create unrealistic pressures. Understand that asking for help is not failure. Know that elder abuse can happen in any family, regardless of education, income, or social status. If you're an elderly person feeling unsafe, your safety matters more than family harmony. Speaking up is not betrayal, it's self-preservation. There are people who will believe you and help you. It's never too late to seek a better life. If you suspect elder abuse, trust your instincts. Document what you observe. Report to appropriate authorities. Offer support to the victim. Today, Folek sits in her favorite chair by the window of her small apartment, watching Toronto's skyline change with the seasons. The CN Tower, where her son works, rises in the distance like a sentinel, reminding her that she is not alone. At 80, she has learned that home is not a place or a building or even a country. Home is safety. Home is dignity. Home is being surrounded by people who see your worth and protect your well-being. She has found that home in Toronto, not in the house where she was abused, but in the community she has built, the friendships she has forged, the purpose she has discovered. I came to Canada to be taken care of, she says, her voice strong despite her years. Instead, I learned to take care of myself. That is a gift I never expected. Her story reminds us that it's never too late to choose courage over comfort, truth over silence, love over loyalty. And sometimes, that choice saves not just one life, but an entire community's understanding of what family should really mean. 3 years after the trial, Adebayo received an unexpected phone call. Yetund, released early for good behavior and completion of her therapy program, wanted to meet. They met at a Tim Hortons near her halfway house. Neutral ground, public, safe. She looked different, older, quieter, somehow smaller than he remembered. I don't expect forgiveness, she said without preamble. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What I did. How wrong I was. Adebayo listened in silence. I was jealous of your mother's place in your life, she continued. But more than that, I was jealous of her childhood, her sense of belonging, her confidence in being loved. I never had that. And instead of healing my own wounds, I tried to create new ones. She paused, stirring coffee she wouldn't drink. I know I can never undo what I did. But I want you to know that I'm grateful that you stopped me, that you chose her, that you didn't let me destroy more than I already had." They parted without handshakes or promises. Some bridges, once burned, are never rebuilt. But understanding can exist even where forgiveness cannot. That evening, Adebayo told his mother about the meeting. "She looked broken," he said. Folake nodded. "Good. Broken things can be repaired." It was the unbroken arrogance that made her dangerous. She paused, looking out at Toronto's lights twinkling in the darkness. "I hope she finds peace, Omomi. Not for her sake, but for the sake of whoever she meets next. Healed people heal people. Just as hurt people hurt people." And in that moment, Adebayo understood that his mother's greatest victory was not surviving the abuse, but refusing to let it turn her bitter. She had chosen healing over hatred, wisdom over vengeance, hope over despair. In the end, that choice had saved them all. If this story touched you, if you're experiencing elder abuse or know someone who is, help is available. Remember, it's never too late to seek help. It's never too late to speak truth. It's never too late to choose safety over silence. Your voice could save a life. Like this video if you believe in protecting our elders. Subscribe for more true stories that matter. Comment below, what would you have done in Adebayo's situation? Share this story, because somewhere, an elderly person needs to know they're not alone. Share it. Elder abuse thrives in silence and dies in light.